How is everybody doing? Okay, let me just hit this button here. Welcome to this presentation. I'm so happy that you guys are here. This heat wave is killing me right now. I was gonna put on a nice shirt for all of you, but I'm just sweltering right now. There's like sweat in my shirt. I can't handle. So I'm gonna be doing it in this t-shirt. I'm sorry. Glasses make it a little bit more formal. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the recording, I will make it available somehow. Because I know that this is full. I didn't realize there would be over 100 people in this, so that's cool. I should have expected that, or maybe streamed it or something. But I will stream it again. Let's see now. The other thing I was going to talk about was no, I think that's it. I think we're good. So let's get started because I know you guys got other panels to get going. So I put this character profile together. Just some rad facts about me. If you don't know who I am, my name is Devin Katie Lee. I guess I'll point out the important stuff. I'm from New York City, which is kind of surreal on 9/11 to be presenting this right now. But I've been working in the industry since 2006 in entertainment. I've been doing mostly games and animation for what I've been doing, but I've done so many weird jobs that I can't even begin to describe some of them. But I think most of it has been doing visual development, character design, and illustration. Currently, I'm working at Warner Brothers. Been doing the animation Gremlins Secret of the Mogwai, which has been really fun, and working on a couple other projects that I'm pretty excited about. But at the moment, I'm also teaching. I teach at Workshop Academy, and this is kind of this presentation is kind of like this definitely took a lot from what my 10-week course would be, and so this is kind of a much more abbreviated version, but and also a little bit more focused on particularly coming up with character ideas and that sort of thing. So let's get to where we're going. Hello. Oh, hey, David B. How you doing? Is that Blight? How you doing? So who's this presentation for? So I'm going to be talking about my experience as a character designer, my thought process behind creating new character ideas, observations for art directing my own character design, which I think is a really important skill, to be able to art direct yourself, step outside yourself, and kind of analyze your own work. Ways I wrestle with indecision while designing. I think that's something we all kind of struggle with. And how I think about shape design solutions. So how I take ideas, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I take ideas and apply them to actual shapes and how I think about shapes a little bit. Now, disclaimer, this is more like guidelines than actual rules. If anything, it's more like a method. It's not even guidelines. It's just a way that when I'm stumped, I come up with ideas. I think it's kind of a, what's the word? It's kind of a myth that character designers can just, we just open up our consciousness and the light of the heavens kind of fills us with ideas, but that's really not the case all the time. I mean, it works sometimes, and I think some people are definitely much more inspired than others in some ways just because of their experiences and their abilities. But I think the reality is a lot of character designers will come to a point where they're struggling to come up with an idea. They're going to be given some prompt and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And that's definitely true with me. I'm sure there's character designers in here that are thinking the same thing. So these are just kind of like what I do in those situations. So, if stream of consciousness ideas are working for you, that's great. This is for when you kind of run into design inspiration kind of a rut, so to speak. Oh no! Oh, Vinod's here. Vinod, my and actually Blight. Both I've worked with them before. They're coming in here to support me. I appreciate it. Vinod never had any creative block. Okay, yeah. So when we've been doing this for years, you kind of have to develop abilities to kind of like just push through those tough times a little bit more and just kind of think about what's available to you right now, like what can you use right in front of you. So I'm going to kind of go through that. So this is kind of like 1,000,001 ways to just like try to think about ideas with the material you have and go from there. So how do we start this? I'm going to start this with, let's start with what we got. So best case scenario, when you get a prompt or a text or something, it's really descriptive. It tells you about the characters, like the color of their hair. It tells you about how many eyes they have. And it's like really convenient to just have really well-described briefing telling you exactly what to do. That kind of, oh, it's like a relief for me. But that's usually not the case. But a lot of that has to do with when it's given to us as character designers, a lot of it has to do with how we're interpreting that text. And when people are hiring me to interpret their descriptions, they're basically asking me to show them my point of view with what's available. So a lot of it is interpreting these briefings and like how and what to take from that. I think initially, when you're just starting out with a project, it's really good to think about the medium that you're about to partake in. So what are your characters going to be displayed in? So just to start out with, we have some examples here. Action game design. So maybe in an action game, you would want to accentuate the movement of the character. It's really important to have player immersion that really kind of that a player can really get invested in the character they're running around with. It has to be like fun to play with that character, and the movements have to feel fun, right? I love it when a jump in a game feels just like really nice. It feels like butter when you're like running through a game with that character. And also, I mean, demographic also comes to play when you're designing for action games. I mean, when most of your audience is teenagers with amazing Twitch skills, you know, there's a particular audience you have to cater to in those instances. Now, maybe a serial comic strip. Maybe you're designing characters for a serial comic strip. So if you think about designing characters for that, some of the problems you might run into is that you have to draw this character like hundreds and hundreds of times, right? And so it ends up being difficult if you have tons of detail and like lots of information and you're like really rotating that character constantly. It kind of, over time, that character will start almost like a rock getting beaten by the waves of time. It'll start getting smoothed out. So those are things to think about. Making a character that's easy to reproduce, something with clarity of action and emotion, especially if it's like a humorous gag, and a uniquely expressive style. And you know, if you're using a comic strip and you're, for instance, getting displayed in a newspaper or something, or not a newspaper, what do people use nowadays? The internet. If your comic strip is being used next to something else on the internet, you want to be able to stand out in that crowd, right? That's really important to have a very unique and expressive style. And then let's say you're working on a children's animation. So maybe some of the functionality might be just being able to tell the story clearly to children. I mean, this is usually where shape design really, it really benefits from doing exaggerated caricatures and having very bright colors and legible expressions so that your characters communicate to children very well. So these are all just sort of scenarios that you might be working with, and they can already, from that point, you can already start to be inspired in terms of the kind of art direction you're going to take with that character. Sometimes I'm on projects where there's really no other reference. I might be the first person on that project, and there's nothing to really base my sketches on. I mean, sometimes if I'm fortunate, I'm working with a team of artists and we're all kind of like working together, but a lot of the times I'm working in a vacuum. And so this kind of helps me kind of at least wrap my head around what I'm about to involve myself in. Oh, and by the way, I will take time for questions later, for sure. I'll take some time for questions later. I think there's like a hand raising functionality. I don't know how useful it is. This is like my first time kind of using this, so I'm kind of like the Zoom functionality. So bear with me. But if I see a hand being held or the raised hand thing, maybe I'll cue it up. Let's talk about taking text to heart. So now going back to text is really the best case scenario where you have like a pretty descriptive you have a very good description of what you're about to tackle. But the problem with reading from the same text is that it can be interpreted sort of in a repetitive way, and to the point where maybe you might start leaning on archetypes. So if the briefing says, you know, you want to design a wizard, and then you start, your mind might immediately go to the archetypes of like what a wizard is. Like you have a wizard hat, and you have a wizard cane, and you have a wizard robe, and then you end up kind of reusing a lot of imagery that has already been very established. So I think when I'm trying to tackle text, I try and poke at it from every angle. I try to think about one thing I really definitely think about is sort of the ways that people can reinterpret the same text from different angles. Like, you know, someone that has a bird's eye view might interpret a text description differently than someone who's on the ground level, and as a kind of a bizarre example. But I guess what I mean is when we're lucky enough to have a written description, we don't need to rely on those archetypical descriptions of characters to draw imagery from. So this is an example I did of the Cerberus, which is a very famous monster design from Greek mythology. And he's the protector of Hades and the gates of hell. And so this character is often described as having 3 heads, and like very often you'll see like snake extensions coming out of the back of its head, and its tail's made out of serpents and things like that. And that's kind of like the more conventional way to recognize the Cerberus. And what I was doing, and this is from an old painting, I tried to sorry, close that. I was basically trying to see if I could reapproach the same descriptions in an inventive way. So you can see this Wikipedia entry I just stole here. Cerberus not only had 3 heads, but 3 bodies, according to Virgil. He had multiple backs. And Cerberus ate raw flesh, and he had eyes that flashed fire, a 3-tongued mouth, and acute hearing. And then when I read that, it's very different from how I would imagine a 3-headed dog to look like. I mean, that doesn't really sound like anything I conventionally remember. So when I tried to tackle this design, I thought about, what if I was encountering this monster for the first time and I was trying to describe it to another person? How would I write that text? And so I tried to design a face for this creature that kind of looked as if it could have been 3 heads. You know, it could have been interpreted as having 3 heads sort of mashed together. And really, and sort of, it could look like it has multiple backs. But really, it's more of this kind of like horrific, chimera of like smashing 3 dogs together and trying to like make more muscle mass than looks comfortable, and then trying to kind of make these this pattern of like molten skin kind of going across it to kind of maybe represent scalation as from the snake element. So I'm kind of just taking those ideas and seeing if I can like reinterpret them from a different viewpoint. We know with the 3 tongues, I mean, what's funny about this drawing is it actually ended up being kind of charming, because it's like dog behavior is like having your 3 tongues wagging out and like, being funny. So there's a bit of a charm to this drawing that was not intended. And then after I did it, I was like, oh, that's kind of cute actually. So I really like this painting for that reason. These were some drawings I did when I was working on Lord of the Rings Online. This was my first ever job in games in like 2006. So I was working on Lord of the Rings Online. And the real benefit of that project was that we didn't have to base it on the art direction of the films or the books or anything. Well, we were basing it off the book text, but not any illustrated books. So we were kind of just working how we wanted from scratch and just from the text descriptions. And what's really cool about working on this project was like just being able to reinterpret a lot of the text, because Tolkien was not very specific about a lot of these things. So these were my interpretations of orcs living in Moria, which I'm sure maybe you've seen that version in the movie. But my take was to think about sort of the circumstance that these orcs are in, right? Like, what's their day-to-day schedule? Where do they get their coffee and things like that? So I'm thinking, well, they're in the dark, their skin will get really pale because they're not really in the sunlight that much. Maybe they get really intense eye shine because their eyes are more adapted to low light levels. And the resources that would be available to them they wouldn't have the sophistication to make any armor themselves, but maybe they can take stuff from the dead dwarves that live there, kind of like tear up the armor and like, reorganize it on their bodies. And then they would use like the hair from their beards and their jawbones as trophies in a way, maybe as like kilts. I mean, how insulting would that be if you were using someone else's facial hair as your diaper? I mean, that's pretty gross. So that was kind of like my way of trying to interpret that. Maybe like one of these characters just kind of wears all their jewelry kind of haphazardly, not really knowing how to put it on them, but like, he considers himself the king, so that's like how he makes himself look more important. So these are the sort of things I like to think about, is like, what is the text saying about the environment they live in? So don't just rely on the text of the descriptions of these characters necessarily, but think about the context that they're in to sort of generate those ideas. This was like based off a very small, oh, sorry, I think someone's, I think this is a good example of like how that happens throughout history, like this idea of like the Cyclops, right? And I think the Cyclops was something that was interpreted from this idea of the elephant skull. Like people saw the elephant skull and then they were like, what does that look like? I mean, how does that make sense? And so the Cyclops was adapted from people seeing an elephant skull for the first time, not knowing what a living elephant was. And so what I really like to do with my text descriptions is kind of lean into the unreliable narrator, at least at first. Like, if at least as long as I can, as long as the art director or the producer, whoever is, allowing me to, however long they're allowing me to, I will stretch that unreliable narrator for as much as possible. So, and this happens a lot in paleo art as well, like when people are interpreting like what dinosaur bones look like, and then they kind of like new discoveries kind of reinvent that appearance. So I use that kind of logic a lot to kind of generate new ideas. So how many different ways can you describe the same thing off a single text brief? So this creature on the side here is one of the nameless things, which is like the least description you can get. It was called, this is one line: far, far below the deepest delving of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. That's the line. That's what this entire creature is based on. So it was mostly just basing it around the idea of something that was almost Cthulhian in nature, and sort of like something that just resembled a giant mouth, effectively. And that was kind of the premise for this character, just based off of this one line. And so I really tried to make it feel like raw meat, almost like it's primordial or something like that. And so those are the kind of things I was trying to kind of get into. Like, maybe it's made from like the skulls and bones and material of things it's just absorbing around it, and it would have like this like galaxy black hole in its mouth or something like that. And so that was a really fun project to work on, was being able to reinterpret all this text. Now let's get to my other side project, which is doing a lot of Dune artwork. And I know Dune's really hot right now. I'm really excited for the film and all the interpretations of it. This is stuff I've been doing long before I actually even, like, I think I started doing it in like 2000, around when the Dune miniseries on Sci-Fi Channel came out. I think that's when I started getting inspired to do Dune artwork. And when I started interpreting the ideas, reading the text, I was like, oh, this is so crazy different from how I imagined it would be. I mean, it's being written in a very different way, and sort of the tone and the mood of everything. They go into a lot of specifics about color I wasn't seeing in the films. I mean, like different colors mean different things. Like yellow meant death, because yellow was like the color of the sun, and sun is like death on Arrakis, the desert planet. And colors like green were like life, obviously, because there's like nothing around. There's nothing growing in Arrakis other than maybe like their small food banks or something like that. So I think that was really important to kind of rediscover when I was reading the text, is finding these new descriptions. So when I say listen to the themes of your story and use those character designs to express those themes, what do I mean by that? So like one of the themes in this book was the Fedaykin, the Fremen, how they were the death commandos, right? And the death commandos, the Fremen in general were sort of like this kind of like race of people that were kind of barely hanging on this planet. Like it's very hard to live in Arrakis. And in the future books, especially past book one, they kind of start getting phased out from society. They kind of become a relic. They're almost like the dead. I always compared them to the Walking Dead, because they're kind of like these relics from the past that are just kind of hanging around, and they just kind of go through their traditions and things like that in a very sort of in a way that's just for practice sake, just to maintain those beliefs. And it really kind of lost a lot of its meaning after the first book. And so with that foresight, I was thinking, well, what if I like theme these characters to kind of feel like the dead? They're the Walking Dead. So a lot of the still suits were like these suits that they used to capture the moisture from their bodies, reclaim it and drink it. I was trying to think about, like, what if they look like organs and exposed bones and things like that, almost like they were like zombies. The zombie people. So that's kind of how I interpreted that text, and that's how those are kind of the themes I was using. And this is Leto II from the God Emperor of Dune, and he becomes like this mutated super worm, right? And so this was I was taking the text and I was doing it. There's kind of a looser interpretation. So I was trying. There was definitely depictions of worms with like three little mouth things. Like they have these like we call them these like three cusped mouths, right? So I was trying to integrate that design back into the God Emperor, and I think when I was trying to design it, I was like, I have to make this feel kind of regal, because in the book it's kind of just described as like this long turd character, and he's got like these weird flippers, and he has his human arms and he has his human head, and then he can like blink. His whole face can blink or something like that. So I kind of tried to run with those ideas to make it seem like maybe his head could retract into his body like a snail or something, and then trying to use this three motif thing to kind of create this throne feeling. So it almost looks like he's sitting in his own kind of like body kind of a thing. It almost feels like he's kind of made his own throne around him. This is another example of like trying to infer from the text, so to speak, taking this Fremen and spice trader and maybe integrating some of the dune worms as actual like material that would go into their mask and things like that. So that was just ways to interpret text and things like that. Now, what if we don't have any text to base anything on, and we just have to like come up with stuff from thin air, which is like also a big part of the job. It's kind of funny how much people depend on designers to just come up with ideas. They're just like, oh, we'll design a warrior, and it's like, okay, okay, let's design a warrior. Okay, sure. So like, what like you got to think through the archetypes of a warrior, and like, how do we mix this up? And it just becomes this like kind of repetitive challenge after a while. And you have to kind of find ways to like make it interesting. So I have this concept called hooks, gags, and gimmicks that I like to play with. Just designing around these interesting points about your character that really engages the viewer. They kind of like, it's something to kind of like focus on. In a lot of ways, I think of these as being clear ideas that you can like almost describe to another person. Like if I describe to you, you know, there's a plumber and he wears like blue and red and he wears white gloves and he punches turtles and mushrooms for some reason and goes through tubes. Who do you think of? You think of Mario. I'll just answer for myself. People aren't going to answer in chat. But Mario, I mean, he's such an iconic character, and you can like visually describe him to another person. And I think that's kind of interesting about that character, is how easy he is to describe to someone, because that's how iconic he is as a character. So when we're thinking about distilling characters down to very particular things that are almost describable to another person, like with words. And so I try to have a hook, gag, or gimmick with all my characters that kind of serve as like an anchor that allows the viewer to kind of wrap their head around the character and tells them about that character, tells them what they're about. You know, ideally, you have a lot of these. I see a lot of inspirations where it's like, well, if you just surround yourself with a bunch of reference photos, like, you know, I'll take a vase and then I'll like make a character out of the vase or something like that. And now it has like all the embroidery of the vase or something like that. That's cool, but the level up from that would be something like, well, if this vase was from a particular culture that kind of pertained to maybe the behavior of this character, like if you're using a sort of a Greco-Roman vase versus maybe like a Mayan vase as your reference point, what does that say culturally about the character that you're designing? And what does that say about sort of the mood or what materials are available to that character? So that kind of describes a little bit more about where that character's world is about what that character's world is about. And that's what's also interesting, is if you create strong hooks and gags and gimmicks, not only can you extrapolate and like kind of reiterate on that character if you need more ideas, but it also is inspiring the audience to infer and extrapolate their own ideas about the story world. And I think that's really important to have a character that like becomes like, you know, almost like infectious, so to speak. Like you can't help but try and come up with ideas for that character. So let's talk about what's most important when we talk about hooks, gags, and gimmicks, is talking about signifiers. Called as reading the signs. So this is something that was introduced to me from an art teacher I had in art school, Shanthan Jetty. And so he used to talk to us about this idea of signifiers, which are basically sort of things that when you put them together, they kind of create ideas in your head. So remember back to the wizard example I was using with the hat, staff, and the robe, and you think wizard. If those are all sort of signifiers of a wizard. And a lot of the time when we're character designers, we're using these all the time, whether we're thinking about it or not. We're using signifiers to kind of harken back to old other ideas, and then maybe taking something that harkens another idea, like, you know, like maybe a torch, and then combining that with a wizard, and now you have fire mage, right? Something like that. So we're using those kind of ideas pretty often. Now, signifiers can be subtle or loud in their description. They are also context sensitive. So especially when it comes to cultural significance. So what I was saying before, where it's like, you know, depending on your reference material, you might get a different feeling from those signifiers. archetypes developed in the reuse of signifiers over and over and over again until they become standardized. We'll talk about that later, but archetypes are both good and bad. Like archetypes basically do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Like you don't really need to understand much past an archetype because it's like, oh, well, it's explained to me. This is a wizard, right? And because I can see it very clearly that this is a wizard. But there's some circumstances where you might want to mix that up. I mean, it's really becomes more interesting when you kind of subvert those archetypes. So let's talk about how I kind of, breaking this down for one of my characters, how to point your viewer in the direction that you want to go. So this character, Oru, was also from Gigantic. And so here are some things that we kind of settled on in terms of the behavior of this character. And this was actually taken from a thumbnail. So I had a thumbnail of this character that was really tiny. And then from that thumbnail, I came up with these character traits like mischievous, clairvoyant, mystical, kind of like astrological kind of magic. And then from there, we kind of fleshed it out and started doing all these kind of more reference. So when you're finding inspiration for your characters, choose signifiers that say something about that character. And then look for clever ways to integrate your signifiers into new silhouettes and shapes. So when I'm racking my brain about like, okay, visually, what do I want to use as just like in a almost symbolic way, talking about this character, I think, okay, wizard hats and magic 8-balls and in Ouija boards and tarot cards, in like slumber caps and things like that. And also maybe combine, there's some overlap here where it's like the planets and maybe a crystal ball. They both have sort of a round spherical energy. Maybe we can kind of like combine that and turn that into one thing. So that's what I'm constantly doing when I'm making new characters, is taking these motifs and these signifiers that say celestial magic, mischievous and unpredictable, and then trying to rearrange it. I mean, effectively, this character is just a magic 8-ball with a bunch of wizard hats for limbs, and that's what he is. He's a 8-ball with magic hats for hands, and that's basically what the character is. And I'm also introducing this kind of hula hoop that he has, which is fun. And we did that for his animation so that he would almost feel like this kind of spherical Saturn kind of creature that would kind of like move around, and that would kind of imply this connection to space and astrological, and of course stars. And those kind of motives make it even more clear and really hit it over the head. So that's kind of like my line of logic when I'm thinking about these characters. And you can even see these artistic influences down here. Like I'm not working in a bubble. I'm still thinking about like, other references that inspired me. So I was thinking of Baron von Munchausen, the Moon King and things like that. The Cheshire Cat has this kind of like spontaneous, unpredictable, like almost demigod energy, like a Cocopoeli? Am I saying that correctly? Like the mischief god in Native American culture. And what's another one? Like Q from Star Trek was another big inspiration for that. So those were was my line of thought for designing these characters. Now again, so just to go back to that point of signifiers and costumes can give a lot of context to each character, especially when you're designing them with the rest of the cast in mind. So for instance, with Moana here, we have like culture and environment very easily being told about that character. Without knowing anything about this story, I can see, okay, wherever she's from, she's probably from a hot climate because she's wearing, she's dressed pretty lightly. She's barefoot, so it's not like a very dangerous place to be, I guess, to walk around barefoot. So maybe a beach, I don't know. But what's really telling me is the materials, because she has like this dress made out of palm fronds and things like that. And then of course, if I'm culturally aware of what the Pacific Islander kind of like clothes look like, I would be like, oh, okay, she's a Pacific Islander or something like that, right? So these are all the signifiers that are telling me about that character. Here we have an example of Ratatouille. And this is a clear example of conformity and status. So you have what is it, LaRousse and Skinner, I think. So Skinner is the guy with the tall hat, and LaRousse is like the short order cook. So now Skinner is in charge, clearly, because his hat is bigger. It's just kind of funny how they just organized it like that. I mean, it's definitely if you watch Ratatouille, it's definitely also kind of overcompensating, because when you have those two characters next to each other, he's also very short. And I think this is Carter Goodrich design. So, but like having that hat like kind of make up for his height, but also is kind of like a depiction of his status, like a big chef Pope hat almost. And LaRousse is like on the bottom rung. So his hat is just like this little like very thin, short hat like right here. I don't even know if that's actually like what they wear in France for cooking, but he has this like ridiculously short hat that makes him look like he's lower on the totem pole, so to speak. But what's also interesting about that is it doesn't work unless they're both kind of dressed in this familiar white kind of clothes. So they're both wearing white, They're both wearing chef outfits. So you know that they're associated with each other and that you should be comparing them against each other within that context. And then, of course, Harry Potter, very clear. I mean, he looks like a traditional schoolboy at like an English boarding school, but then he also has this wand, which is like a signifier of like what? Magic? Is he magic? He's a magic student? Okay. So you can put that together very clearly when you look at this character. Now let's talk about maybe the narrative inspiration. So the motivation behind why we wear things in apparel doing this. So the motivation behind why and also how we wear things, I didn't say how, but why and how is really both important, can change dramatically based on personal experience. And we can use this to describe how our character thinks. So consider how a character would choose to present themselves and also what they may do unintentionally. So, you know, one good way to separate sort of fashion from the rest of the apparel is that fashion is something where you're making choices. You're making choices about how you're presenting yourself to other people. And what's really important about that is that, you know, I mean, there's definitely a subset of people that can't choose how they dress, like, you know, people that are enslaved or people in prison, things like that, or kind of the same. But I think it's interesting that they don't have a choice in what they're wearing. But if you do have a choice in what you're wearing, you modify yourself, even if you are in a prison outfit, you'll still choose to like maybe pull down your pants a little bit or like roll up your sleeves or something. And why do we do this? Like, why do we do these things? So here's an example of these two characters. And like this guy on the left, maybe I tried to depict him as, you know, a little bit burly, and the other guy's kind of a scrawny, I don't know, tech bro or something like that. I'm not sure what he's about. Maybe he kind of looks like me a little bit, to be honest. So, but I think what I tried to do here was make them dress similarly. So they both have this collared shirt that's kind of with the sleeve pushed up. Now his character on the left, he's pushing up his sleeves because he's about to do some manual labor. He's about to get down and dirty. He's unbuttoning his collar because it gets hot when you do physical labor. You know, and he also has a signifier of the mining pick, of course, to show that he's about to do physical labor. But that's kind of what I was trying to do with him. Now, a character on the other side, now he's not doing physical labor. You know, what is he doing? Why does he roll up his sleeves? Why does he unbutton his collar? And it's kind of hearkening back to this idea of the guy on the left. It's this idea that I'm rolling up my sleeves because I'm about to do work, or I'm a very proactive person because I roll up my sleeves and I'm about to engage in an activity. I'm unbuttoning my collar because I'm so active that I need to stay cooler. It doesn't actually mean that. I mean, he's not actually doing physical labor, but that's kind of what the fashion statement is when you're rolling up your cuffs and rolling up your sleeves or unbuttoning your shirt. These are kind of the ideas that you're trying to come across, and they come from that cultural history of people actually rolling up their sleeves to do physical work. It's kind of fun. It could also say, you know, I'm a laid back person. Like, I'm not a conventional person that has their sleeves rolled up down all the time because, you know, that's too square, man. You know, like he's trying to hang with the cool kids, so he's going to roll up his sleeves. Because you know, he gets down and dirty just like the rest of us, which is, you know, kind of funny. I also there's also natural inspiration. So drawing context from where these animals might live as a way to as a point of inspiration. So just like we're talking about with the environment in Moana, talking about maybe characters that adapt to a particular environment. So your character in this example of this top character is sort of grew up in a boneyard or something like that. Maybe they evolved in boneyards, so they kind of like have to match and look like bones. And we can also use patterns in the bottom here, maybe to showcase like different top and bottom so that they just have clarity. So you can use that costume for a variety of reasons. Here's an example of something I've designed. This is another character from Gigantic. So we're kind of going through the timeline. I'm kind of like going through like my old work and then coming through the middle. So this is kind of in the middle. And Aisling was a character that we had designed where she was like this little girl, and the idea was that her sword was possessed by her father figure. So the challenge here was make it look like they're connected somehow without telling the audience that they're connected. So my idea was to have her dressed in something that looked really oversized. So it looked like it's something that she is not ready to wear yet, but she's wearing it. And also something that maybe has like motifs on it that might harken back to this other character. So I designed this little rose idea, and also she has this rose in her hair, just to really knock it over the part. I mean, just to knock it over the head, and also repeating that again on his shield. And that's a very easy way to kind of tie two characters together that would otherwise not have any sort of like visual coherence with one another. And yet further trying to take that idea of this, like of this being the father figure, is just the idea that maybe she's wearing the coat that maybe belonged to someone older or bigger, which would imply that maybe it's her father's coat. So I'm like, I'm trying to imply this story with just the props and things like that. You know, the sword is the same sword he's using, but it's maybe a little bit more worn down. It's got some scratches in it and things like that. And also with his shield design, you know, this is kind of a little deeper, but I was trying to think of, okay, maybe she's the rose and he's the thorns that protects her or something like that. So his shield has these like thorns on it. You don't have to go that crazy. I don't know if anyone's actually reading into it that much, but I like to have that information there so that, you know, if you're looking at it for the, you know, 1000th time that you're playing the game, you'll be like, oh, I didn't notice that before. And then that's fun. That's really fun for the audience to kind of pick up on that stuff. And these are some other things from Gigantic. So this is, again, the biological root that I was explaining before. This was supposed to be a storm drake. So this is one drake among many. This is being compared to like a fire dragon. I think there's like an ice dragon and an earth dragon, but we had to make this one shoot lightning and lightning damage. So lightning damage in this game had a very specific mechanic. So the player had to know this is a lightning dragon. So when I'm thinking about visual language for this, I was thinking, okay, so maybe it's a storm. It's like a storm kind of monster. It's something that would be comfortable in the water and the sky. So something that maybe I would use motifs of like something that was deep sea, deep underwater kind of creatures, like things that glow in the dark, you know, things that have bioluminescence about them. And that would kind of give me an excuse to like light up his body in fun ways. And then also kind of like incorporating some of those details into the face and like making his wings kind of appear kind of flippery or something like that. He has this face that's kind of like a gulper eel, if you've ever seen one of those, like the massive jaws. So these are the kind of things I was thinking about with that. And also there's this association of like electricity and animals that live in the water, like electric eels and sharks that use electromagnetism to like navigate their environment and things like that. So these are, I was kind of leaning on my biological knowledge, I mean, my zoological knowledge, I guess, to kind of create new ideas and associate those signifiers with what you're trying to, with this whole lightning scheme. You know, creating themes for the characters. So this idea of like, this dragon is one among many is part of this bigger picture of creating themes. Like, what do we keep and what do we get rid of when we're making characters in a cast of characters? So here we have I had to design a couple different like looks based on work that already existed. We had some of these kind of cultures kind of thought out, but like we really wanted to kind of like get to know what they feel like, you know, really kind of know like, okay, these are kind of like intellectual mechanical type characters and these are kind of like magic casters. And so we're making a lot of shorthand decisions about, you know, what do we retain about these characters, and then how can we diversify within that group? And that means really establishing strong color themes, strong shape language, strong kind of like silhouettes that really kind of repeat over and over to kind of show that off. Now let's apply this to a character design I've done. So this was a character design I did for like a character design like design book, and so this kind of like, it's kind of laid out this way, and they kind of gave me a briefing. So they had this briefing of like an old wizard that uses evil magic, and they're kind of deceptive. They have like a transformative aspect to them. So that's where, so my mind goes, okay, it's like starting from that as a jumping off point, like what are some signifiers I can use? So my mind went into, well, I want to make this look pretty crazy, right? But I can't make it look too crazy, or otherwise it will be unrecognizable. It still has to be recognizable as this old wizard doing magic, right? If it's too crazy, it might seem alien, or it might seem like too indistinguishable from anything else. And so it still had to retain that identity of an old wizard. This is where archetypes are useful, because when you're going ham on a design, you still want to lean on those archetypes to kind of bring it back and ground it for the audience so they understand what this character is really about. So you can see here, this character actually transforms. It goes from this like hunched position into this true form, kind of dark, mutated magic kind of look. And so I was trying to think of signifiers that would kind of deal with that. So I was thinking, okay, maybe creepy invertebrates like ambush predators. So I was thinking like things that like bury themselves in the dirt and like spring out and explode. So I'm looking at like ant lions and centipedes and like bobbit worms, things like that. So really creepy things. And I think the other association I had with invertebrates is this sort of transformative aspect, like the molting, they molt and pupate, how like maggots turn into flies and things like that. So that was kind of the train I was on. So yeah, this whole idea of transforming, hiding their true form. The character is unusually confident. Like it can also be behavior that kind of tips it off, and the way that your character performs. And that's also up to character designers, is showing how the character is performing in a situation to really tell that story a little bit better. And then of course, the style, I mean, is kind of independent of that, but I really kind of also wanted to make it colorful and like not completely gothic, but like be interactive and fun. So these kind of caricatures are a little bit more goofy. They're kind of exaggerated realism in a sense. They have anatomy, but not necessarily like realism. But you know, for me, this is more fun to do. So this is kind of the style I went with. And I'm just trying to. And for some of these, it was a little bit too obvious, like having centipede antenna coming out of their nose, or like having pinchers on the back of their head. If you saw that character, you know, it might kind of freak you out a little bit even before the transformation happens. So these are just like ideas I was kind of playing with. Now, eventually I kind of stepped into this direction where I had this character that was kind of like cloaked, and maybe he walked around with this like crippled limp all the time, and he'd kind of like lean, he would have to like lean on his staff and put weight on it. So he'd kind of almost appear crippled. And then when he would transform, there would be all this like spiraling energy and like this like green flames that kind of look like insect swarms or something like that. And so that's kind of what I was thinking of as a theme, and like trying to incorporate this idea of spirals. Spirals are kind of this shape that kind of goes in and out. It's a very like, you know, hypnosis. You're thinking about psychology, confusion. Those are the kind of things you might associate with spiral shapes. Now, I haven't really talked about that a lot, but you know, this whole idea of like circles and squares and triangles, a lot of that are just signifiers of things that kind of exist in our world. You know, but when we think of what kind of spirals we see in life, well, you could think of like tornadoes and whirlpools and things like that, snail shells. So things that are kind of associated with the unknown, with mystery, those kind of things. So I think, and also confusion, of course. But this is kind of a layout of these kind of expressions that I'm doing. And I'm really trying to get a little bit more of that personality in the character. We just skim over this really. And this is kind of the final product. So I was trying to come up with an interesting way, maybe this character's it's kind of like not really explained how these giant centipedes are kind of like extending out of this guy. And I kind of wanted to leave it kind of creepy, like you don't really want to look under the robe. And so hiding some of that is also really important, is being able to let the audience infer the creepiness and let them infer what's going on in there, because I'm sure you can think of a bunch of solutions. Maybe are they coming out of his butt? Are they coming out of his back? Like, where are they coming out? So I kind of like just wanted to leave it there, and just, you know, it makes it that much creepier that you don't know what's going on. Now, total flip end, we're going to talk about Spyro. So as you can see, I do a lot of stylistic changes in my work. And for me, I think of style as something that is to serve the character in a lot of ways. So what I've tried to do is become very stylistically flexible. And that really helps me with the kind of work I like to do, which is kind of constantly experimenting and doing fun stuff. And also just having a lot of variety. I like just being able to draw in lots of different styles. And the result is I get a lot of clients that ask me to do things like, you know, can you draw this character realistic and like maybe a chibi version and then like a semi-realistic version? Like I get asked to do kind of like style guide stuff. And that stuff is really fun for me. I like to kind of, you know, help with that kind of art direction. And Spyro is kind of like on the opposite spectrum of everything we were just kind of talking about a little bit. I mean, with this at least. But I thought I'd show. I thought it was pretty jarring to put those right next to each other. So it's pretty funny. But you know, Spyro is a completely different audience. It's for like young children, and you know, maybe like 30-year-olds that played the game in like the early 2000s, maybe, or 90s. I think the original game came out. And so this was kind of a reinvention of that game. And so most of what I was tasked with was designing these dragons. There's like 80 dragons that you have to rescue, and they're all like Spyro's dad. I know it's really strange, but they're almost like his like they're all his dads. He's got like 80 dads, and so you have to like go through the game and rescue them all from these evil orcs. And so it was really important that, for one, that you connect with the character, and they kind of had like a mentoring kind of feeling about them, but also they had these particular houses. So there was like an artisan house, and there was a warrior class, and then there was a whole house that like was magic, and then there's one that was kind of like a slumberland kind of dragons. They had these crazy themes. 90s were really fun. So all these ideas were really great to start out with, but in the game, I should have showed an example of what they look like. You can probably Google them or something, but in the game, they kind of just reuse the same model. It's like PS1, and it's like there's not really a lot to them. So when we were redesigning them, we were trying to come up with all these themes, and these themes were in particular to these houses. So we're like wrestling with, okay, do they still walk on all fours? Like, can they wear clothes? Like, what are the props they're using? And one of the original pitches was we were going to design them based on celebrities. So like for the artisan house, they would all be like Van Gogh and Da Vinci and like David Bowie and things like that. They would all be kind of based on actual human caricatures, but that kind of drifted away from that. And we're like, maybe we could say artist in a different way, where we just kind of use different types of artists to describe our dragons. So each dragon had their own thing. These are all artisan dragons. So this is this one's a painter, and this one is a clockmaker or a watchmaker, and this one's a ceramicist. So they're all types of artisans. They're all related to art, and that's kind of like their tying in factor. And then the fun part is kind of like just coming up with all the gags, the gags, which are the signifiers in this case, like having a paintbrush and having them kind of painted, like covered in paint and stuff like that, and covering the guy in watches. They're very simple to understand ideas, but we just had to iterate it like 80 times. So it was really important that we came up with something that was kind of fun and clever, but was also easily recognizable. And it's fun for the audience to like pick through these and just go, oh, he's from Artisan House, and like I was like, oh, that's definitely from the Magic guys, and like that's a Beast Maker, and you can kind of like point out their personalities and tie them to the different houses. And so each one not only had a different personality, but they also had these different professions that they all had. So it was really fun to kind of like just think of all these fun ideas. And it's fun for the audience to like also think of their own versions of these dragons. And it was great seeing a lot of the fan art that came out of this, where they were trying to like make new artisans and they're trying to make new warrior dragons. I think that stuff was awesome. So those strong core themes are enough to carry the idea even further, to the point where other people are iterating on your ideas and they're making their own content. And that really creates more lasting and impressionable character design. Now, when we're designing these, we'll kind of a little bit of a segue to a different kind of designing in groups, where we have to always be comparing this whole cast. Like we have all these dragons and they have tons of variety, but they're all dragons, and we had to make it clear that they look like dragons. So here's something that I try and do when we're trying to design like a cast of characters or something like that. If you're starting from ground zero. So for instance, in here, I nailed this character. I really like this character. So this is Mr. Komodo. I don't know if that's, what do you think is a good name for him? I don't know. Maybe make some suggestions in the chat. But he's basically these reptilian dudes, and they're all just like corporate meanies. I kind of got a little jaded during lockdown. I started thinking about like corporate structure and like the people that work under them, and how people prey on the low and the people beneath them and things like that. So I was thinking of this like comic strip where these like reptilians run the world, and they're all just kind of assholes together. And then and I had to like come up with like these different characters that kind of represented different themes in there. So I came up with this guy on the left here first, and I was like, okay, so the next character I make has to look different from him. So I'm just making a direct comparison. So I should have maybe even cut this up so it was a little easier presented, but basically I went down the line and designed these one after the other. And the benefit of doing that is that you're always directly comparing it to that first character. So this character's tall and slim, and he's got like broad shoulders, almost like a heroic kind of chest. And then the second guy, okay, well, he's got to still look like a lizard person in a suit, but his body and anatomy has to be different enough where I can tell them apart. So maybe he's like really stout and square and triangular, and he's just like this mad bearded dragon kind of guy. And then this like skinny blue guy came after this one, because I was like, well, this guy's like really confident and like, has a lot of swagger. He's got like his hand in his pocket. What if there's one character that was just like kind of like the a Dwight Schrute, like always on edge, like trying to get everyone on schedule kind of thing. He's like chain smoking cigarettes, and he's just like on everybody's case about what they have to do, and he's like always by the book and something like that, and he's like always like has a lot. He's like a ball of nervous energy, and then next to him, I was like, okay, maybe the next character could be something where it's like they're kind of like a antediluvian type character. They've been in the company for years, like hundreds of years or something like that. They know how things are run. He just bosses everyone around because this is what we did back in my day. That kind of corporate guy. And then maybe this character over here, maybe she's like the spin doctor. Maybe she's like in Mad Men, where they kind of like, we're not Mad Men, but she's kind of like the PR person, and she makes like the company like look really good, but she's actually lying a whole lot or something like that. And then over here as the foil, we have this little mouse character. And the mouse kind of represented the interns and like the little people that were on the bottom rung. And for me, it was important that I choose like a prey animal. So like, all these reptilians, if I would expand the cast of these interns, they would be like insects and mice and like things that reptiles eat. And so this guy, he's got the low end of the stick. And I just imagine like at any time during this comic strip, he might take the coffee and then like eat an intern just for fun. And then like they'll just like have to go about their business, like haha, nothing went wrong. So these like these chipper mice, I designed them so that they can't look down, they can only look up, and they're always shorter than the reptilians. And that was kind of a design decision I decided to make them always feel like they're kind of like always looking up to these reptile people. And on that end, we can segue into what I like to talk about with subversion, and like ways that you can subvert your characters to make them more interesting. I think we rely on archetypes quite a bit, and I think especially in video games, and actually no, especially in animation and video games, we're always relying on archetypes to kind of like make it easier for you to just understand ideas quickly. You just want to like get the audience to understand these ideas, and archetypes are a quick way to access their previous memories of what a warrior looks like, or like what your grandmother looks like. These kind of signifiers kind of cue you in real fast and tell you about that character. So the briefing for this character was a sword person with a pet, and they were mysterious. That was the brief for this character. So I like to use this example a lot. I like to use Tyto as an example a lot because it was a more fun example of subversion. So my initial design of this character was, they're like this bird person, and then they have a sword, and they're like super skilled. And I thought, well, okay, they're like a quiet, mysterious warrior, so they'd be masked all the time. And what's a quiet bird? Oh, owls. So I was like, okay, they have an owl mask, and it's like they're quiet, they don't communicate. Now, pretty much they're like Batman, but with birds instead of bats, right? And deciding what the pet was difficult, because at first I put a bird on it. And you can put a bird on anything, and it's great, but it would have been bird on bird on bird. It would have been Birdman with a bird. And that would have been full on Batman. That would have been like, Batman, he has his batarangs and his Batmobile and his like Batcopter, and everything is like Bat styled. It's really bizarre, actually, and kind of weird that anyone would ever do that. So I'm thinking, okay, it would kind of almost feel like this character was almost full of themselves and their own image that way. So I needed a character to kind of soften the blow of what that is, like to subvert the expectations of this like clear badass with a sword and like they got a cape and things like that, and then try and like kind of make them a little bit more relatable. And subversion is a great way to do that. This is a more subtle way of doing subversion. I'll get to some other examples of subversion later, but this is sort of subverting it by using something that you would not normally predict about that character. So in the way that this mouse is being used as kind of a gag for these characters, in that they consume mice. In the same way, an owl might consume a mouse, they mostly eat mice, and so this would be a prey animal normally. And the relationship between them, though, is friendship. So kind of similar, I was thinking like Aesop fables, like the lion and the mouse, how the lion like pulls up thorn or something like that. So they would be very unlikely friends. And so that kind of rounds out the character. And because this character doesn't talk or do anything, really the mouse is the only evidence that this character has any compassion, that he's willing to like take care of this like cute little animal, is like enough to sell you on the idea that they're not a complete asshole. Is basically what it goes. So let's look at some other versions of subversion. These are a lot more in your face about it. So these are just some quick examples, like, Batman, his himself a subversion of superheroes, in that he looks like a bad guy. Same thing with Spawn and Venom and those things. And then on the bottom, you might have like these, like the Goblin King, who you would expect to look like, oh, I don't know, a goblin in the labyrinth, but it turns out to be the fabulous David Bowie in sequined leather, and you're like, wow, I did not see that one coming. And then you're like on board for the rest of the film, right? Then there's also the physical absurdity. So I like this example of Adam Ant, where he's just like this tiny ant, and it's just absolutely absurd that he can like lift heavy objects or something like that. And then of course you have intentionally miscast animals, which is like the theme of most movies. You know, like Ratatouille, he's an animal that normally steals your food. Now he's an animal that makes your food. You know, Sergeant Hopper is their name. She's a rabbit that is normally a prey animal that runs away from things, but she's actually pursuing everything. You know, it's a snail that's fast. It's an elephant that's light. You know, so these are just kind of ways to just kind of flip the script on, you know, conventions and make it so it's just a little bit more interesting. And I think this is really relatable in the current zeitgeist, where we're constantly questioning the past. We're constantly questioning the thing that came before us and like trying to like, you know, say something else about it. And an easy way to do that is to just look at that character from a different angle, like subvert the expectations of that character. Judy Hopps, thank you. Yeah. Portlandia reference, yes, it was. Very good. I'm seeing some of these. So now let's talk about designing for movement. So a lot of these characters, now this is a little bit of a little bit different, but I'm going to talk about when I'm designing shapes. When I'm designing shapes, I'm trying to think of how to adapt all the stuff I'm trying to say visually, and all these like ideas, and I'm like trying to come up with ways that kind of really complement how that character comes across in the frame. Like, what is the medium here? We're looking at like a computer monitor? Are we looking at like a movie screen? Are we looking at like an animation or something like that? And I think based on the medium and the way that you kind of interact with that character, you might rely or lean on different artistic principles more than others. So some things that might work for one thing might not work for another character, but you can really like kind of lean into those ideas. And I'll get to that in a second. So just to read this off, we use line and pattern and silhouette and volume to bring clarity to our designs. So often a character design will lean on some of these art principles more than others. So let's talk about that, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So you might want to design your character in terms of line of action and rhythm. So when you're designing things for an action game, for instance, it's really great to see that character in movement. Or if you're working on a martial arts film or something like that, or if you're working on something where there's a lot of action, line of action and rhythm is really important to emphasize on. So when you're designing characters, it's really nice to think about ways that can enhance that feeling. When you're filming or you're playing that game, you're really kind of thinking about those principles when you're designing. So for instance, you know, back to Taito, like accessories that might echo the paths of travel. So the lines of movement are extended with props. Like the cape behind the character shows where the character's been, and then the sword is showing where they're going. So it's like this big arrow. And it's really nice to see and feel when you're moving around with that character, or when you're watching them travel around screen and things like that. So, you know, on the bottom are some examples of characters that I really think take really big advantage of lines. So like Mushu or Ink from Batman Beyond, one of my favorite villains, but they're characters that are really just made up of lines. These are Claire Wendling drawings. This is Street Fighter Alpha, the Third Strike, Afro Samurai, I think there's 5-star stories. So these are characters I think that like when they're moving in the frame, they really take advantage of the line of action, and you're really following the simplicity of that line across the screen. So when you're trying to design for something of that nature, where it's characters like moving around a lot, you really want to kind of emphasize that line. Here's some, you know, talking about these designs. These are two different ways I'm trying to use pattern to kind of accentuate and complement motion. So I'm creating accentuating lines that kind of repeat and kind of reinforce the pattern of like where you're supposed to go. And when we're talking about patterns, I talk about this more in my class, but patterns are really, when you're setting up a pattern, it's kind of like a predictable thing that you can follow very easily. So if you don't break up, we talk about, I'm sure you've heard of things where it's like you want to change up your spacing so that things look more visually interesting. But there's sometimes where repetition is really important and really good. Like in the examples of like this character, Rutger, who's like a pangolin that is like an earth-bending pangolin. So he's made up of all these like ridges, and they're very repetitive, almost like a tire. So it's very clear to see the motion. If he like rotates or spins or something like that, it's very clear to see that because everything is very evenly spaced. And so when they bend in space, when those forms bend in space, you can actually see that bending even that much more clearly. Taito, because they're always moving forward and they have this very like directional movement, the cape is sort of this, looks like this radial explosion when they move. So, and this is wonderful animations by Kyle Dahl and Johan, both amazing animators. Fun fact about Joe, he also animated the dinosaurs in King Kong. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's animating Taito. I thought that was so amazing. I still think it's amazing. Very talented dude. But when he animated this Taito, and he had him like spinning like this, he really took advantage of that cape and like made it like feel like a hurricane when he comes down. Now let's talk about silhouettes. This is like another artistic principle. So when do we use silhouette? So when I think about silhouette, I'm thinking about how it's composed against the square frame that you're kind of viewing these things in. So when you're looking at these characters on the bottom, for instance, they're characters that really kind of take up the frame. A lot of them are pretty square looking. It's not a coincidence, but they take up the frame in a particular way. They cut up the frame in a certain way, and they don't really move as much. And but they're, even with them being static, has a lot of presence. And so when I'm designing characters around this idea of silhouette, I try to use bold, broad shapes, uniform values. So like things where it's just like one character is all black. So you have like Kingpin here from Spider-Verse, and then these are the henchmen from Triplets of Bellevue. I love this kind of design where it's like the two henchmen, they form this like black square around the little dude, and this is like the big boss with the big nose guy. Great movie if you haven't seen it. So it's really emphasizing, I really like to emphasize silhouette for characters that have a lot of dramatic impact on when the camera's on them. That's usually reserved for like the main bad guy or like the main superhero. When he has like a lot of presence on screen, I rely heavily on silhouette. So talking about, Vinod is here, right? So these are actually a couple of Vinod characters, and he designed both of these on characters on the side. This is Margrave and Gnosis, and these are like heavy hitting characters, right? So that they charge at you and you don't want anything to do with them. And when he was designing these characters, he gave them a lot of mass and a lot of silhouette. But what's also really important is that, for instance, on Margrave's asymmetrical. So he has this like massive, like kind of like giant, like demon arm, and it's only on one side. And it's really important to know which way this character is facing, because if he's facing towards you, that's a bad thing, right? So you really want to have a good indication about where this character is facing. And it's a little difficult to like read the internal details, because this character is like almost one value. He's like black, but you can tell that one arm is on one side at any given time, and that gives you at least some understanding of which side that character is facing. Gnosis is similar in that he's big, but his silhouette changes dramatically when he's lowered. So like when he's lowering his horns, his whole body kind of like tilts forward, and so that kind of changes up his silhouette dramatically when he's animated. And he also has a very light value on his stomach and a darker value on his back. So you can very clearly see this is the light side, this is the dark side, this is the way he's facing. On my own design, so this is character on the side. This is this like little goblin blood thief guy. And when I was thinking about this character, I was really thinking about how this character just fits in a frame. And this is most of my illustrations, is designing characters that kind of fit in a frame. So this character is entirely made out of triangles, and it's all triangles, triangles, triangles. And so I was really trying to emphasize like, activating the corners of this space with the edge of the wing or something like that, but also having an opposing triangle that they're kind of resting on. So it really just feels like really like all these triangles kind of like layered on top of each other. And then if you look closely, it's just even more triangles. It's like triangle ear, triangle face, triangle weapon, triangle hat. Everything's triangles. And so kind of keeping the simplicity of my shapes when I'm working on these kind of helps give it a little bit more impact, visual impact. Yes, I'm stealing your hot content for this presentation. Now, functionally, now I'm going to give you a couple scenarios where silhouette is not your friend. So when I was working on Spyro, we had to design multiple characters, the dragons, and we had to work together on creating silhouette variety while preserving their identity as like these dragons, right? So really the challenge here was just like trying to come up with ways to make them still feel like dragons, but also give them enough, give our animators and our riggers like enough range in order to make something that feels like there's like a culture to this. There's variety. There's like short people and tall people, like, you know, like real life. You know, there's round people and square people. And so we were trying to come up with these rigs that would kind of fit all of them pretty well. And then on the complete flip side of that is having one character and trying to reinvent the look of that one and trying to maintain the identity of that one character, but provide a lot of variety and looks to that one, because these are all cosmetic skins for this, for Taito, right? So, you know, if you're trying to sell skins, and I mean, this is something that, I mean, basically the modern gaming economy is kind of based on, is trying to come up with these very specific class characters, but then like creating like a way to like just like keep iterating on the same thing. Like, okay, where can we go with this? Where can we go with this? So the big challenge here was, okay, I need to we need to design characters where they're iconic enough where if we mess with their look, they'll still look like that character in their silhouette from very far away. And that's really important when you're making cosmetics, is making sure that it still recognizably looks like the character it is. You know, sometimes the ones that are poorly designed, you'll confuse them for another character, and that's not a good thing. You don't want to ever be confusing a character with another character in a fighting game, right? So, because then you don't know what you're up against. So it's really important that this still reads as Taito no matter what. And we do that by giving them iconic anatomy, like giving them only, I mean, they have one arm, they have a mouse on their shoulder, and they have this like long cape, and like that's his look. I mean, that's their look. And no other character in the game kind of has that, and we'll make sure that any future character never has that kind of design, so that this silhouette is only theirs. Now, lastly, talking about designing with volume. So these are characters that where, especially in video games, but like where the player might have control of the camera. That's a totally different problem, because now you're rotating around the characters, and you got to see them from multiple angles, and they have to read and be clear from all those angles, and that's kind of hard. And especially in Disney film, or not Disney films, animated films, 3D animated films, they use the camera in all sorts of fun ways, and they still have to be identifiable as that character. And the way you do that is by controlling the volumes of that character. So using techniques to wrap around the character, showing detail work that gives clear paths around the form, so that when they're receding in space, they still kind of feel, and you can like look at it and really interpret that shape as it's bending in space. So here are some quick examples of what I try and do with that. You can set up a hierarchy with just creating big, bold shapes of color. And then by the fact that they're overlapped on top of each other, that's enough information for you to discern whether like this head is in front or whether it's in the background. You can also, of course, use volumetric lighting. That's probably one of the most popular ones, because when you're casting a shadow on something, you're actually kind of drawing invisible lines, like the banding. The shadow banding is literally wrapping around the form and telling you that this shape is bending in space, right? You can also stack values. You can use detail density. So these are all like ways to kind of create more or less complexity with your designs, so that the forms are still readable in space. Things like this, where it's like the lines are all in one direction, kind of really makes that thing feel like a torpedo, but it's also very easy to like follow that curve in space. I do that a lot on this character as an example, where I'm using the scalation of this like alligator character to kind of make all these ridges. So it's very clear to see. I'm trying to make these volumes very clear to see in space, and they kind of like wrap around through repetition. So I use a lot of repetition in my work to really kind of enhance and describe volumes to the person that's making the art. Hi, Kitty. No, you can't be part of the presentation. All right, I'll let you out. There you go. Go ahead. Okay. Sorry, it's my cat. So designing face volumes for performance, that's really important for consistency, but also, and this is a problem I often see, is people design faces and they don't leave enough room for the features to animate. So this is work I was doing on the Scooby-Doo film for Warner Brothers, and this is one of the cast characters, and so I'm trying to design the volumes of this character's face, and there has to be enough spacing to allow for things to move around, to have the eyebrows lift and things like that. And if we make those features too tight and close together, then they don't really have enough room to be animated. They don't really have any space to go. So doing that in 3D is even harder. So we really had to make sure that when we're designing these volumes that they kind of like had space to move around. Here's just another example. I don't know why it's laid out like this, but so that first slide was probably the best slide in the whole, the one where I was just doing like, I was my fighter game profile. I probably put more work into that slide than any of these other slides. But this one is just is a character Wu, and so you can kind of see this, he's like a fighting frog. And so I'm using a lot of these details to really wrap around the forms. You know, these cylinders, creating cylinders, they just kind of create these like straight lines. And you know, when you're creating these volumes, you have a lot of control over how the viewer's eye kind of falls over that landscape. You know, I kind of sometimes think of a character's silhouette as like a landscape, right? And if you pretend to like you're in a little car and you're like kind of driving around, you're like, oh, I'm gonna go over this speed bump, and then it's clear travel. Oh, gotta go down here, and then you have this like roller coaster down the arm, and then another roller coaster down here. So all these little bumps are kind of like speed. You know, they kind of control the speed of how fast your eye might read a form. And so I kind of do that by either creating more or less nuanced like little bumps and things like that. Like if they had like Michelin Man anatomy where they're just like lumps, then it kind of feels more inert. Like it feels like it's not as like aerodynamic, but it feels very volumetric, right? As opposed to this character where he has very cylindrical forms. And these cylindrical forms they just feel a little bit faster because they don't have anything stopping them, just like straight lines. So the more straight lines that you're infusing into your character, the faster and more light that they seem. It's almost as if they can travel through space faster because your eye is literally traveling across that form faster. There's less details to get caught up in. So a lot of times I think about that when I'm trying to simplify my own work and like try and parse it down. I'm like, what can I get rid of? Like, what can I eliminate to really make sure the statement of this character is true to what it has to be? And lastly, we're wrapping up. My cat's name is Socks. The one that I have two cats. That one is Socks. So lastly, rely on your own experiences. So I think it's really important that we search for ideas from our own experiences. It's like a last point of like where we can draw inspiration from. So hopefully that was not too discombobulated, but the idea here that I'm trying to offer as many different ways to be inspired. And I think this is the one that kind of should go without saying, that you should be relying on your own experiences to draw ideas from. But I don't think enough artists do it enough, where they feel like they have to be kind of wrapped into this world of art where we're always like looking at other artists and then like kind of regurgitating and responding, and like, you know, we're always kind of like taking all these ideas within the culture of games and animation, and we're just kind of like turning it over and then like, you know, seeing what else we can do. We're kind of like continuously subverting the same ideas over and over. I think it's really important that people go out into the world and do things and then bring that information back into the art world and then kind of like feed the machine a little bit better rather than just regurgitating the same material. And so I think relying on your own experiences, doing other things is really important for you to expand your visual vocabulary. These were examples of just like characters that, so these characters on the side here, these were kind of ambient creatures. And I drew, and if you don't know me, I'm obsessed with animals. I'm like, not like in a really knowledgeable way, more like a zoo books kind of way. So I know like a lot of animal facts. I could tell you like lots of stuff about turtles if I wanted to. This whole lecture could be about turtles, but I really love animals. And so whenever I'm designing things, I just kind of like obsess about ways I can kind of like introduce my zoological knowledge into like what I'm doing. That's what I'm personally interested in. And this pinup on the side here, you know, I lived in Boston for a while and working at Turbine, and every year we would have St. Patrick's Day, and it would just be crazy. Like everyone was Irish for a day, everyone dresses in green, they're walking in the streets, getting completely plastered, and you're just like kind of like following the chaos around. And then people are just like dressed up to the nines in like green stuff. And I saw this one lady, she didn't look like this, but she dyed her armpits green, and I was like, that's stuck in my head so vividly. I was like, the extremes of not only having like these really impressive bushes under her arms to dye, but like they were like vibrant green. Like, how'd you get it that green? That means you have to bleach it, like go through this whole process. So that really stuck out to me. I was like, I have to design a character with green armpits on St. Patrick's Day doing this. So I thought that was so funny. And so those little anecdotes you wouldn't get unless you kind of like go out and do things and make observations and go to the coffee shop. You go to, you know, whatever hobbies you have, pull from those experiences. I like to dance. I like to do, I keep a lot of animals. I keep reptiles and things like that. And I kind of use them as inspiration all the time for myself. And I think that provides just a bigger well and ammunition for me to draw from. Can you give you at least one turtle fact? Okay, I'll give you a turtle fact. So there's a turtle named a mata turtle, and they actually use suction to take fish into their throats, right? They use vacuum. But the ironic part about that is that we actually evolved necks because we're not in water anymore. Because fish, they can use vacuum to like pull in fish. And so the mata is doing the same thing, but it's using a neck. So when we got on land, we evolved necks because our food would run away from us and we had to like lower our heads, right? But when you're in the water, you can just kind of suck the water and the fish goes like, and your food kind of goes in your mouth. So it's just kind of funny that with the mata, they actually reverse evolutions to have the function of a neck like reversed. Like now the neck is serving the purpose for why it evolved a neck. Isn't that weird? Okay, that's cool. Here's a turtle fact. So on that note, thank you. And I appreciate everyone coming to this presentation. Hopefully that was informative, helped you out. Again, these are not rules. These are just like ideas that and points of inspiration to take from. So I'll open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions, if this made any sense. You know, and also, I mean, it doesn't have to be about this either. It could be something about anything else. I'll try and took somebody notes my hand here. It's excellent, excellent. Best panel I've been to. Wow, thank you, Pamela. I mean, there have been some amazing panels. I've been so social. I have not been this like artistically social in so long. It's kind of bringing tears to my eyes because like I literally have not talked to other artists in like a year because of lockdown. It's been so crazy. Where can I take a class with you? You can take a class with Workshop Academy. I think this semester's full, but I'll probably be teaching again next year. How to cultivate as diverse a range of styles as you. Tips for learning and practicing them. Yeah, I do have a tip that I tell people. I tell people that you know, if you're trying to have more diverse range in your styles, a style is almost like a mindset. It's like you have to put yourself in a different mood, in a different tone. Like I play different music. I look at different movies. I try and get myself in the zone because really different styles are about kind of capturing the tone of what of your project. And so getting in the tone and the mood of that set is really what gets it to you. Like for the longest time, I was trying to do like cartoony characters and it never really felt honest. You know, there's always like this edge of sarcasm. And I still think I still have some of that, but over time I got better at it because I kind of had to like return to that point in my life where I was a child and like things were not as sarcastic as they used to be. Like I had to like change my point of view. And that's a really big part of style that I don't think enough people really tap into. This is being recorded. Are you planning to post it somewhere? This has been an amazing presentation, really insightful. I think this is available for the rest of the thing, the rest of the Lightbox. But I think I'll plan on posting this if you thought it went well. Do you sketch on sketchbooks too? You know, it's really sad. I haven't been sketching a lot during lockdown because I haven't had a chance to like go out and go to a coffee shop and do it. So I have been sketching on my computer mostly. So yeah, it's the sad reality of that. Thank you, Hector. Do you have any exercise that we can do to practice design? Do you have any exercises? One thing I'd like for you, if you want to practice design, is try to apply your design to something that is abstract, like a feeling or a mood or like a memory. That's a really fun exercise. Like can you design a character around a childhood experience? And like, you know, like maybe if there was a bully or something like that. And then like, what were the things that you might have associated with that bully? And then try and time warp to like when you got into a fight with that bully, like, why do you think that bully got into a fight with you? Like what was going on in their life and that kind of thing. And those kind of things really kind of inform a lot of what I do as a character designer. Like when I'm just trying to come up from nothing, is really work from a personal experience. So that's, I think, a strong exercise to do. If you're a middle artist again, what is a middle artist? What is a middle artist? What would you do to improve faster and in a good way? What schedule would you have? Oh, I wish I knew. Especially on character design, how much would you spend on studying and how on fun art? You know, I have a really hard time just sitting down and doing laborious things. Like it's just very difficult. So like laborious new stuff, like doing 3D or like doing perspective really hurts my face. So when I do that, I have to make sure that it's in a way that is engaging. And it's totally fine to be easy on yourself. Like if you're trying to challenge yourself to like design an original character and you're trying to like practice like stretch perspective and you're trying to do all this, it's a lot. You know, like if you're trying to design that one thing, try and eliminate the other obstacles. Like if you're trying to practice foreshortening, maybe just like use a superhero that already exists, like use your favorite superhero and draw the perspective using something that already exists, rather than having to like challenge yourself from every angle possible. You know, like try and be easy on yourself and really just focus on the particular thing that you're doing. And I think that kind of focused methodology has worked better for me. And it also makes it more fun because it's like more engaging. What has been one of your favorite panels? A lot, I have to say, it was still on replay. A lot. Let's see. I loved it. I mean, I was watching my friend Nick Cole and Claire doing the character design stuff. A lot of the caricature panels I was seeing. Watching Victor Kalfachev do his doing his sketchbooks and things like that. Also, just going to the drawing jams. The drawing jams have been really great. That's been like really cool. Megan P says, great panel, thank you so much, thank you. Any tips for drawing a bunch of expressions or poses more quickly? Like getting into, I would definitely start practicing doing gesture drawings real fast. I think, in fact, you know, doing expressions and poses should be done quickly, in my opinion, because then you really feel the energy of what you're doing. So I think definitely practicing a lot of life drawing poses and doing a lot of variety, you know, drawing a lot of things in that sense. Who's a good person for that? Matessi. Matessi's an excellent the force guy. He's a really excellent teacher for that kind of thing. I thought facial expression, it was more for animation, but your work is so full of it. Is full of it. Any tips on how to develop an understanding or visual library of facial expression? Actually, there is. There's a whole chart out there. If you look up facial expression chart, you can literally see how facial expressions are kind of almost they're almost what's the word, formulaic in a lot of ways, and then you can use that at least as a starting off point. But you know, it's interesting, like, you know, our face can only move in so many directions. Like we can raise our eyebrows and lower our eyebrows, and we can open our mouth, we can pull down the corners, and we can raise the corners, we can do all these things, but there's really not that much we can do. And really all the variety of expression comes from combining all of these, and then on top of that, layering sort of the feeling of that expression, how it affects your whole body and how that might inform your whole face is really important. So when I'm doing facial expression, when I'm trying to practice facial expressions, I'm really just trying to find what the pinnacle of that is. And then I'll reel it back if I have to, but I'm really trying to push that expression to the nines as far as I can. And it really does change from project to project. Like obviously I can be more expressive on a project like Spyro, and then like, you know, when I'm doing my Dune stuff, it's very like stoic and like, you know, everyone's grumpy. So when I'm trying to do those kind of different varieties, I kind of also have to think within the limits of the style of what I'm drawing, the mood and the tone I'm setting. You know, if everyone's like Looney Tunes in Dune, it wouldn't make as much sense. So finding the right way to clamp your expressions to a particular kind of tone or mood is also really important to understand. Any animal zoology books or resources you like to recommend? Well, right now it's been YouTube. I've been watching like PBS Eons. I've been watching like Clint's Reptiles, Snake Discovery. So I'm not right now. I'm into really watching YouTube channels for my animal stuff. And so I think that's probably my recommendation. I think that stuff's really cool too because they're always up to date. Like I get 5 days of paleontology or 5 days of science, I think is called. That's really informative. I love getting updates that way. It's really been a great presentation. Thank you, Ben. Keith, thank you. Upload this. Thanks. Middle intermediate. Sure. Can you briefly talk about shape language? How do you explore different body shapes for a character, starting from scratch, or size of a character when nothing else exists for the character yet? Yeah. So something like that, I would really take into the context, like what's the purpose that it's trying to serve, and that might change. Like when I was designing that cast of lizard people, like that might change. Like I might come back to that first character and be like, oh, he's actually too small compared to the rest of the cast. I have to scale him up to make him look more important. So I stay flexible and I try and really trying to like do a lot of comparison, especially when you're doing a cast of characters, because really the size of a character doesn't really make sense until you have something else to compare it to. So once I get that established, once I get that relationship established, then I can make those adjustments. So that's really important first, is understanding their character's relationship to something else helps me determine their size or scale of something. Thank you, Mariko. Not a beginner, neither professional. I see. Just got to join. The room is full. Oh. Hope everyone takes a lot of notes. I wonder if they'll ever copy PowerPoint. Yep. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.